All right, what I want to talk about today is the alternatives to the resurrection. Now, if you didn't watch our video on the minimal facts argument for the resurrection, you can check that out right here. But what about alternatives? You know, is it really the most reasonable to say that Jesus rose from the dead? You know, what if there was another reason that his body wasn't seen, or that the disciples saw the body, or that the disciples saw him walking around after death? So that's what I want to talk about in this video. The three most common alternatives to the resurrection are: number one, hypnosis theory, that the disciples that Jesus hypnotized the disciples. Number two is what's called swoon theory, which is what a lot of Muslims believe, which is that he never actually died on the cross, but just fainted or swooned. And so, you know, the disciples saw him later, but he never actually died. So they were just seeing Jesus before he ever died and saying, oh, he rose from the dead. And the third most popular is that the disciples stole the body. So let's get into those one at a time. So first of all, hypnosis theory, that Jesus hypnotized the disciples into thinking that they had seen the risen Lord. Well, there's a lot of ways that you can approach this to refute it, but the most obvious is that hypnosis does not work the same for different people. So when you're hypnotized, maybe you are hypnotized and tricked into seeing something, okay? But someone else is not going to see the same thing when they're hypnotized as you will, okay? So you can do your research on hypnosis and how it works, and you're going to see that in all of the cases, they have different experiences, okay? So hypnosis doesn't work. Okay, hypnosis doesn't work because there were multiple people that saw the risen Jesus. Okay, it wasn't just one person, right? There was multiple people. He showed up to the 12 apostles. He showed up to Peter. He showed up to James, the brother of Jesus, who didn't believe in him. He showed up to 500. This all comes from 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8. And you may say, well, that only comes from one source. But actually, you have 5 people, 5 different sources who wrote about Jesus, okay, rising from the dead. You have Peter, right, 1st and 2nd Peter. You have Matthew, of course, in his gospel. John in his gospel. You have Jude, the brother of Jesus. And then you have James, the brother of Jesus. So that I might be missing some, but that's minimally 5 different sources writing about the resurrected King Jesus. Okay, so those 5 are not all, and church history tells us that 11 of the 12 were never refuted. You know, never refuted the fact that he rose from the dead. So you have 11 people there. And if you believe that, and then if you believe the source of there being 500, many of whom were still living, then you have those. But even if you say, well, I don't believe any of that, you still have at least 5 sources, 5 different sources, who say they saw the risen Lord. Hypnosis theory also doesn't account for Paul's conversion and for James's conversion. These are part of the minimal facts that I discussed. So he would have had to then go hypnotize Paul after he was already dead, and then go and hypnotize James as well. Okay, let's look at the second alternative. The second alternative, again, that a lot of Muslims believe is called swoon theory. And again, that is that Jesus never actually died on the cross, but that he just fainted or swooned. And so later on, when, you know, he's put in the tomb and then he comes back and he's walking around, you know, the disciples think they're seeing him risen from the dead, But really, he never actually died. He had just fainted. And so they're just seeing Jesus before he ever even died, right? That's the idea of swoon theory. Well, this was debunked long ago. I think a couple hundred years ago. Basically, here's what it comes down to. Swoon theory omits the fact that Jesus was flogged before he was crucified. Okay? So Jesus is beaten with whips with little balls in them. If you want to get an idea of the whips they were using, you can check out that video right there. He's beaten, he's bleeding, okay? He's hanging there on a cross, bleeding, his hands pierced with nails, his feet pierced, hanging on a cross. They take him out of the cross. He's still bleeding, okay? They put him in a tomb on Friday, right? Saturday goes around. He's not eating, no food, no water, still bleeding. Sunday rolls around. You're saying that on Sunday, if you believe that, you're saying that on Sunday, he's been bleeding now for, what, a few days? Minimally a day and a half, all of Saturday, some of Friday, and some of Sunday. Bleeding out. And you're saying that somehow, no food, no water, he just magically gets up and pushes away a 2-ton stone, fights off the Roman guards that were like ninjas at that time, and then walks miles to his disciples and appears to them and says, "I am the risen Lord, come and follow me." Can you imagine walking? I mean, you stub your toe at night and that thing, you're having a hard time walking. Can you imagine being nailed, pierced through your feet and walking on those feet for miles to his disciples? You think you're going to be able to do that? Bleeding for the last few days, no food, no water, and then you're going to appear to it. Even if he was able to get to his disciples, you think his disciples would say, "Wow, that's the resurrection body that I want"? No, they would say, "Hey, call this guy a doctor." They wouldn't be encouraged and then go proclaim that Jesus had risen from the dead even if he had made it that far, which he wouldn't have. But even if he had made it that far, they'd be like, "Hey, get this guy a doctor. I don't want that body." No, he appeared to them risen from the dead. So swoon theory is debunked. Swoon theory also doesn't account for Paul's conversion. How come Paul saw the risen Jesus if he was just alive? And the third major alternative to the resurrection is that the disciples stole the body. The disciples stole the body and then just said that he rose from the dead, right? They lied. They stole the body, they hid it somewhere, and they just said, "Hey, look, there's no body. It's an empty tomb. Jesus rose from the dead." The disciples stealing the body does not account for Paul's conversion, and it doesn't account for James's conversion, right? If James didn't believe before the resurrection, and then the disciples stole the body, James still hasn't seen the risen Jesus. They would just have a dead body. Why would James then become a follower of Jesus? Paul would not have this. He wouldn't be persecuting Christians and then have this road to Damascus experience with a dead body, right? And then the main thing with the disciples stealing the body is that the disciples would not then die for a lie. I mean, how many people are willing to die for the truth? Small percentage, right? But would you die for a lie? If you made something up about somebody and then someone put a gun to your head and said, "Did that really happen?" Are you going to die for that lie? And then not only you, but 2 people dying for the same lie, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, minimally. Church history tells us 11 of the 12 died as martyrs for this lie that they either knew to be true or false. Okay, that's the difference. Again, you may say, well, other religions die for what they believe to be true, but the disciples were the only ones to know for sure whether or not Jesus rose from the dead. So in Islam, you have Muhammad going into a cave, the cave of Hira. He has these experiences where he is told information. He comes out, he has someone write down this information, and then he goes and he tells people about it. They believe the message, and they then are converted. The difference with Christianity, the disciples is based on an event that the disciples saw. Either it happened or it didn't happen. If it didn't happen, they would not die for what they knew to be a lie. And you may say, well, one person maybe would do that. Maybe. But for 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, minimally 5 different sources that have told us of their testimony that Jesus rose from the dead, all 5 of those people, and if you believe church history, 11 of the 12 disciples, and even many more after that. So that is debunked. The most reasonable explanation, though it's not naturalistic, but it is a supernatural event that occurred, the most reasonable explanation based upon the minimal facts that we have is that Jesus rose from the dead. All the alternatives to him rising from the dead have been disproven, debunked. To the point where atheist scholars don't even argue for an alternative. They just say, well, we don't believe it happened. Why? Because the evidence is in favor of Jesus rising from the dead. Well, that's our teaching for today. Check out our other videos, and for more information on apologetics and Christian evidence and Christian education, go to welcometotruth.com, and we'll see you in the next one.